Imagine marching into battle with the certainty that every step may be your last. In Munda, there was no room for fear, only for glory or death. This is the story of Caesar's last battle, where old allies became enemies and the fate of Rome was decided between steel and blood. Get ready to relive the moment when the Republic collapsed and the Empire began to be born. The flame that fueled the Civil War burned to its last breath, and you'll feel every blow, every betrayal, every victory, and every defeat as if you were there. The Battle of Munda, fought on March 17, 45 BC, marked the final chapter of the bloody civil war that shook Rome, turning allies into enemies and brothers into rivals. But before we talk about the battlefield, it is important to understand the climate of tension and despair that gripped every legion and every soldier marching into southern Spain. Caesar was already on a winning streak, having defeated the Pompeians at Thapsus in Africa, where he crushed the resistance of many of Pompey's followers. But the flame of revolt was not extinguished. It just retreated, waiting for the right moment to be reborn. At that time, Rome was not just a city, but the heart of a sprawling empire. Caesar's every decision echoed in the corridors of power and taverns of conquered cities, and the victory at Thapsus, although resounding, had not brought definitive peace. Some Pompeian generals, survivors of past battles, managed to escape. They took refuge in Hispania Ulteria, the southern part of the Iberian Peninsula, where, like cornered beasts, they erected new fortresses, rallying legions of veterans, local soldiers, and even peasants to their cause. Among the leaders of this resistance were Gnaeus Pompey the Younger and Sextus Pompey, sons of the late Pompey, as well as the experienced general Titus Labienus, who had previously fought side by side with Caesar in the Gallic Wars. Now, in a bitter reunion, they were ready to challenge their former ally. It was a war that was fought not only with swords and shields, but also with memories, betrayals, and dreams of freedom that still burned in the heart of every man. Meanwhile, Caesar could not allow that spark to turn into a fire capable of consuming everything he had conquered. The generals who had remained in Spain, such as Quintus Fabius Maximus and Quintus Pedius, hesitated in the face of the force of the Pompeians, opting to remain in a defensive position and calling for reinforcements. It was the sign that only Caesar could solve this crisis once and for all. He didn't hesitate. He gathered his most loyal legions, and in a march that defies imagination, covered some 2,400 kilometers from Rome to southern Spain in less than a month, a feat that left friends and foes astonished alike. Upon arriving in December 46 BC, Caesar found a scene of consolidated rebellion. The Pompeians controlled strategic cities such as Cordoba and Italica. Fortifications stood as walls of resistance, fueled by hatred and the hope that Caesar would be defeated. His army was made up not only of hardened veterans, but also of hastily recruited soldiers, men whose hands trembled more with fear than courage. On the other side, the Pompeians, under the command of Gnaeus Pompey, Sextus Pompey, and Labienus, exhibited 4 legions made up of survivors of Thapsus, local soldiers, and mercenaries. They knew the terrain like no one else, and that gave them a dangerous advantage. The dry land of Hispania Ulteria made every battle a trap of dust, heat, and ambushes. It was clear to Caesar that if he did not act quickly, he would face another long war, something that exhausted Rome could no longer bear. If this journey made you vibrate, imagine what is still to come. Every detail of this story was designed to transport you straight to the heart of ancient Rome, where the fate of empires was decided with blood, courage, and determination. Leave your like right now to show that you are part of this legion that values the knowledge and emotion of each battle. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel by activating notifications so you don't miss any episode of this saga that is still alive. Your presence here strengthens our community and motivates us to bring you more epic stories. Together, let's keep the flame of history burning. With no time to lose, Caesar ordered an aggressive campaign. His first move was to attack the city of Ategua, which was heavily defended by the Pompeians. Using a combination of ruthless siege and psychological tactics, Caesar laid siege to the city, cutting off the water and food supply. With each passing day, the inhabitants suffered more, and the siege turned into a hell of hunger and despair. When Ategua finally fell, the walls opened not only to Caesar's army, but also to the message that he would not back down in the face of any obstacle. The victory at Ategua had the effect of an earthquake on Pompeian morale. Once loyal cities began to switch sides, and even Cordoba, one of the main centers of resistance, became vulnerable. Faced with this scenario, Gnaeus, Pompey, and Labienus realized that they could not continue to flee. Guerrilla warfare and psychological wear and tear would not be enough to hold back the advance of Caesar's legions. A decisive confrontation was then necessary. Thus, at dawn on March 17th, 45 BC, the fields of Munda became the scene of a final duel. On one side, Caesar's army, made up of loyal veterans and less experienced soldiers. On the other, the Pompeian army, made up of hardened men willing to do anything, as they knew they would not have a second chance at survival if they lost. That morning carried the weight of Rome's destiny on every sword, every shield, and every sigh contained in the dusty fields. The Pompeians handpicked the place where they would face Caesar, on top of a gentle hill about 1.5 kilometers from the walls of Munda. There they had a perfect defensive position as they would force Caesar to attack uphill, exposing his troops to a deadly rain of enemy javelins, spears, and projectiles. For Caesar, the situation was delicate. With each step his men took, the danger of collapsing in the middle of the climb increased, but he couldn't back down. Rome's future was at stake. Caesar brought with him 8 legions, including his most loyal troops, such as the 10th Equestrian, the Quinta Alaudae, and the Sexta Ferrata. There were also about 8,000 cavalrymen and an unknown number of light infantry. A mixed army of discipline and improvisation, ready for any sacrifice. On the other side, the Pompeians had 13 legions, about 6,000 light infantry, and 6,000 horsemen. The most troubling detail for Caesar was that many of those enemy soldiers had served under him before, men who were now fighting for Pompey. For them, there was no chance of surrender. It was kill or be killed. This grim detail transformed the Munda camp into a place of inescapable destiny. Whoever lost there would lose everything until the last breath. Caesar knew he needed to turn the tables, and as in many other battles, tried the classic tactic, provoking the enemy to abandon the hill to fight on open ground. He sent messengers, made skirmishes, organized threatening formations. But Gnaeus Pompey and Titus Labienus did not fall into the trap. They stood firm, solid as human walls, waiting for Caesar to be forced to attack. With no alternatives, Caesar made the decision that would change the course of history. He ordered the attack. He raised his sword and shouted the name of Venus, the goddess he considered his protector ancestor. The trumpets echoed across the field, and like a sea of shields, the Roman legions began to climb the hill under a storm of javelins and arrows shot from above. The climb was brutal. Every step taken was marked by death and injury. Progress was slow and difficult. The combat turned into a desperate battle where the melee imposed itself with brutality. Spears clinked, shields cracked, and blood flowed down the slopes of the hill. It was a danse macabre where each soldier fought not only for Rome, but for his own life. For hours, Caesar's army could not advance. The troops hesitated, fearing the fierce fire of the Pompeians. It was as if the hill had become a living wall that no one could cross. The tension was so dense that one could feel fear hanging over the legions, threatening to engulf the morale of every soldier. It was at this moment that Caesar showed why he was different from all the generals of his day. While many leaders preferred to observe the battle from the rear, he decided to take matters into his own hands. In a desperate and heroic gesture, he jumped off his horse, grabbed a shield and ran to the front line. He mingled with the soldiers, encouraging them not to retreat and to fight to the last breath. His every word was a ray of courage in the midst of the darkness that threatened to dominate the battlefield. Caesar knew that his presence there would change everything. He addressed himself directly to his favorite legion, the 10th Equestrian, who were fighting fiercely on the right wing. Like a warrior father, he mingled with the legionnaires, sharing the burden of responsibility and death. With Caesar at their side, the soldiers found strength they thought they did not have. The 10th Equestrian began to push the Pompeians up the hill. Shout after shout, sword after sword, the tide of battle turned. It was at that moment that Gnaeus Pompey realized the mortal danger. He attempted to correct Caesar's advance by redeploying a legion from the right wing to reinforce his left wing, where the siege was heavier. But in this move, he made the mistake that would seal his fate. While Pompey tried to balance his forces, King Bocchus, Caesar's ally, led the Mauritanian cavalry in a devastating attack from the Pompeian rear. Like thunder out of nowhere, this charge sliced through the enemy ranks like an invisible blade, spreading panic and confusion. The surprise attack by the Mauritanian cavalry had a devastating effect. The Pompeian soldiers, already pressured by the brutal offensive of the 10th Equestrian and the conflicting orders of their commanders, watched in despair as their own ranks were disorganized. The dust rose from the battlefield like a cloak of doom, covering men and banners in a cloud of uncertainty and fear. Titus Labienus, sensing the threat from the rear, ordered part of his cavalry to move to counter Bocchus's attack. But the move was misinterpreted by his own troops, who were already fighting on the edge of dread. Many believed that Labienus was retreating, abandoning them to their fate. What started as a strategic maneuver turned into absolute pandemonium. Shouts echoed. Everywhere, soldiers ran aimlessly, and the discipline that sustained the Pompeian resistance collapsed like a sandcastle. It was total collapse. The morale of the troops shattered like shattered glass. Soldiers dropped their weapons, dropped shields, and fled in all directions. The illusion of a last Pompeian resistance dissolved. Caesar, noticing the collapse of the enemy, ordered a full advance. His legions, like hungry wolves, attacked from all sides, crushing resistance and turning the battlefield into an open-air graveyard. Some Pompeians still tried to run towards the walls of Munda, seeking refuge, but many did not arrive alive. The fury of Caesar's legions was relentless, and the cavalry, thirsty for victory, pursued them mercilessly. The battlefield became a sea of bodies, of fallen banners, and of blood mixed with dust, forever marking that soil as a witness to the final ruin of the Pompeian faction. In the end, about 30,000 Pompeians lost their lives on that cursed hill. Caesar's army, though victorious, also paid a price, losing about 1,000 men, a small number in comparison, but enough to remind everyone that victory always takes its toll. Each standard captured, all 13 standards of Pompey's legions, was presented to Caesar as a trophy. For the Romans, losing the standard was the greatest humiliation. It was like losing the soul of the army. As Pompey's legions began to flee, Titus Labienus was killed while trying to reorganize the cavalry. His head was taken to Caesar, who, in spite of everything, ordered his body to be found and buried with military honors. It was a gesture that mixed respect and symbolism. Labienus, who had been his ally in the campaigns in Gaul, now rested defeated. This was the last major battle of Caesar's civil war. With the victory at Munda, there was no longer any Republican army capable of resisting him. Rome finally surrendered to the destiny that Caesar had mapped out and that no one else would dare to dispute. The victory at Munda paved the way for Caesar to return to Rome, not as a simple commander, but as the absolute dictator of an expanding empire. No general, no senator, no political rival could now challenge his power. He had conquered the Republic with sword and cunning, and now he held it firmly in his hands. But the victory had a bittersweet taste. The Civil War had consumed lives, destroyed families, and turned citizens into enemies. The blood that stained the hill of Munda also marked the beginning of a dark, new chapter for Rome. Caesar knew this, and perhaps he felt the weight of that reality as he looked out over the silent field where so many had fallen. Pompey's sons, Gnaeus Pompey and Sextus Pompey, managed to escape the massacre, carrying with them the flame of a hope that, however faint, still burned. Although defeated, they still posed a remote threat as they could gather forces again. However, for Caesar, the victory was complete. The Senate no longer had the power of opposition. The people, tired of war, wanted only peace and prosperity. He entered Rome as supreme ruler, bringing with him not only military victories, but also the seeds of a destiny that he himself could not avoid. A fate that would be sealed not on the battlefield, but in the treacherous corridors of the Senate. Caesar's victory at Munda, however, was not only the outcome of the civil war, it was the harbinger of his downfall. Rome, though pacified, was restless. The people saw Caesar as the savior, the restorer of order. But many senators, dazzled by the glow of his glory, feared that he wanted to end the Republic for good. The Senate, which had once been the center of Roman power, now trembled before the man who had conquered everything. Less than a year after his victory, on March 15, 44 BC, Caesar entered the Senate without imagining that it would be his last day. There, surrounded by men who swore allegiance, he was betrayed and stabbed to death. The knives of Brutus, Cassius, and other conspirators put an end to the life of the one who had defied all limits. But not even death could erase the trace he would leave forever in the history of Rome. Munda, with its bloody soil, has become the mark that no victory is eternal, and that power, however absolute it may seem, is always fleeting. Rome, now without Caesar, would plunge again into wars and uncertainties, proving that each victory carries within it the germ of the next tragedy. If you enjoyed learning more about Caesar's last battle against Pompey's followers, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel. The story lives on as long as there are those who tell it, and that's why we'll see you in the next video. This story reminds us that behind every resounding victory, there is always a price that is not only measured in glory and power, but also in blood, sacrifice, and lasting consequences. The Battle of Munda, more than the end of a war, symbolizes the beginning of a new era for Rome, an era of absolute dominance, but also of betrayals and conspiracies that would culminate in the death of Caesar himself. This is the crude portrait of an empire forged in wars, where alliances fall apart and friends become enemies. Caesar won at Munda, but right there, the seed of his fall began, reminding everyone that power, no matter how solid it may seem, is always ephemeral. And so Rome, built by men like Caesar, would continue its saga of conquests and tragedies, eternalizing in time the marks of each sword raised in its name. If this video has brought you new perspectives and transported you to the heart of the battles of Rome, then now it's your turn to act. Leave your like as a way to repay this effort in bringing such vivid stories to you, and subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of knowledge and transformation. Each entry strengthens our legion of history enthusiasts and motivates us to deliver even more epic content to you. Come with us on this journey of transformation. Together, let's rediscover the past and understand how it shapes our present.